My name is Thomas Klaas. I'm a project director for Friedrich Ebert's Foundation's support program for trade unions in the Middle East and North Africa region. And I am very happy to welcome you all to today's second session of this conference. Our session now is called An Unlikely Partnership, as Tos said, and this session intends to bring more details of the partnership between BWI as a global union and the Supreme Committee as a delivery agency for FIFA World Cup 2022 and its impact on work relations with the contractors. It will offer a closer look at the process and outcomes of the joint labor inspections at the stadiums, on the formations of and operations of the workers' welfare forums, and the engagement on the universal reimbursement program, covering also recruitment fees. So the main questions are also, how was this cooperation managed? How broad and participatory is the cooperation between BWI and the Supreme Committee? And other involved trade union and inspector from other BWI affiliates might also share their inputs and reflections on this process towards the end of the session. However, for now, I'd like to welcome our three panelists for this session, which are Mahmoud Qutb, the Executive Director of Workers' Welfare at the Supreme Committee. Welcome. And Simon Hester, the Lead Inspector for Inspections in Qatar from BWI. And Mr. Gerd Albrecht, the Chief People Officer from B6 from Belgium. Welcome to this session. I think, Tos, we will begin with a short video. Then I would now ask all the panelists for an about 5-minute long introduction of their role and as a person and within their unit in the joint inspection process and the workers' welfare forums. So you would start with Mr. Mahmoud Qutb, please.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure for me to participate in BWI's annual conference. I had the privilege of being in Berlin with Ampit, Dietmar, and Jin last year. I want to take a few minutes, if I may, just to introduce you to the Workers' Welfare Department at the Supreme Committee and the impact of our partnership with BWI. I think it'll be good to set the tone for the panel discussion. The Workers' Welfare Department was established as a dedicated legacy program reporting to the Supreme Committee as Secretary General Hassan Al-Thawadi to enforce and operationalize the workers' welfare standards and report on non-compliances, as well as other significant issues that could impede the goals of the program. From the outset, and I think this is very important to mention this, is that we understood the responsibility of hosting this once-in-a-lifetime tournament. I was a member of the bid committee. I joined in 2009. I was very heavily involved with the legacy of this program, the social human impact of this once-in-a-lifetime tournament. And we recognize that, again, this is the Middle East's first FIFA World Cup. We've been afforded this honor of hosting it, and we wanted to make a difference and create lasting social change. And we've seized this opportunity. The work we are doing today is obviously quite crucial in leaving a lasting legacy of welfare standards that will benefit thousands of workers in Qatar as well as across the region well beyond 2022. Shortly after we won the hosting rights of the World Cup, we seized the opportunity, as I mentioned, to carry out critical groundwork. These were pivotal years after we won. This is the first time that FIFA awards the World Cup with a tremendous amount of time leeway between the award and the event. It was about 12 years. And so we knew we had a significant amount of time to really get our ducks in order and ensure that there's coordination and effort across various facets of the stakeholder community in Qatar. One of the most critical ones was around workers' rights and workers' welfare. And we carried out critical groundwork immediately in 2011, engaged with stakeholders to fully understand the current environment and identify the gaps that we felt needed to be closed as we embarked on the construction of the stadia and the competition venues. The exploratory phase led to the establishment of a workers' charter in 2013. This charter was a pledge to ensuring a lasting positive legacy for the well-being of our workers, and it's really a testament to our commitment towards ensuring that every worker on the 2022 project was treated with utmost respect and dignity. The charter formed the blueprint for the release of the first edition of the Workers' Welfare Standards in 2014, and they were subsequently updated in 2016, edition 2, and edition 2, bulletin 1 in 2018. The standards are embedded in our tendering process and are contractually binding. And this is actually very important because ultimately when we go out and audit and inspect, it was pivotal for us to ensure that the contractors knew exactly their obligations against our standards, and they knew exactly what they needed to do in terms of rectifying, in terms of auditing, in terms of the follow-up that's required. And also, of course, in many ways, it allowed for the BWI-SC collaboration to be pivotal and to be able to actually function unhindered. And of course, the standards are developed in 3 different compartments, if you will. You have the ethical recruitment element, which is critical. You have the accommodation, which we audit as part of our inspections with BWI, joint inspections, and the work environment, which focuses primarily on the sites themselves. Both the charter and the standards were issued before a shovel hit the ground on any of our projects. And this is quite important to note. Last but not least, we took on our responsibility of this very carefully, and we adhere to the highest levels of transparency and openness. And we decided early on to publish annual reports that will highlight the progress, the achievements, as well as the challenges that we are facing, and what the focus will be for the subsequent years. And this is obviously something that we do constantly now. It's on our website, published, and we also have an external monitor. Impact was appointed in 2016 as part of our tiering system. They also publish their own independent reports on our program, unhindered. The current scope, as I've already mentioned, is 8 stadiums and 17 non-competition venues. And at peak, we reached about 30,000 workers on our sites. We've clocked in about 358 million work hours to date. We are currently around 19,000 workers. Again, this is the focus currently, which is primarily construction related, and which is the focus of the joint BWI inspections that we've been carrying out since 2017. As we move closer to the event in 2022, our scope has expanded, and now it's evolving into a wider remit that's focusing primarily on the 54 plus host country operations. These are tournament-centric services and projects that make up host country operations, and it's primarily around manpower and professional services in the area of security, accommodation, transport, and workforce management, just to name a few. We've also started working very closely with the hospitality sector. There's been a tremendous opportunity to do something very unique and very special with the hospitality sector when we collaborated with them initially in 2018. And of course, we have established collaborations with 26 operators that have signed up to our standards, and we are currently in the process of working with them to enhance their capabilities and their compliance levels with the labor law of the state, as well as our workers' welfare standards. So again, tremendous opportunity currently with the hospitality sector. Our work, of course, has never been done in isolation. I think one key takeaway from this entire sort of day today is the impact of partnerships. And we have been very fortunate as an organization to work with several esteemed organizations, both locally as well as internationally, both the public and the private sector. We share the same passion, the same commitment towards making a positive difference to the lives of workers. And of course, these partnerships have helped us cultivate a spirit of transparency and accountability that we endorse as a program. There are also several stakeholders that are not mentioned here that have been instrumental, several from Human Rights Watch. Of course, BWI, our first engagement with them was during the development of our standards, where they were very pivotal. Engineers Against Poverty, Humanity United, and others that were very significant in helping us craft our edition 2 of our standards in 2016. Now, this takes me, of course, to the most significant and rewarding partnership that we will be discussing today, which is the partnership with BWI. In 2016, we signed the cooperation agreement to establish a joint working group in order to carry out what you see before you here, 4 key areas of the collaboration. Now, through the working group, of course, joint health and safety inspections are conducted across our construction accommodation sites, as well as an assessment of our flagship grievance mechanism, the Workers' Welfare Forum. Additionally, there's also a training component, which is integral to the success of the forums, focusing primarily on health and safety, upskilling of our workers' representatives through various soft and technical skills training. There are 8 members to the joint working group, 8 permanent members, and at any given point, we're able to introduce additional members to come in on an as-needed basis, depending on the inspection, depending on the need. We currently, again, in terms of, we've carried out to date 20 inspections, covering about 15 main contractors. And you can see some of the figures here. Of course, this is throughout the past 3-year collaboration where we've identified several non-compliances over the years and accommodation non-compliances. All of these have been rectified. We are very quick to work cohesively as a unit to ensure that rectification happens from inspection to inspection with very minimal non-compliances that do carry over more than a 2-3 month period. We've also carried out several workers reps trainings and covering about 94 worker representatives. And of course, the most important of all is the public reporting that I mentioned. We have 3 public reports that have been published outlining and summarizing our collaboration to date that are posted on both organizations' websites. So that's really it in terms of an intro. I hope these slides at least give you some sufficient overview of our workers' welfare program, our partnership with BWI. And of course, we will get into the specifics a bit further during the panel. Thank you, Thomas.
And now I would give the word to Simon to share his view on the joint inspection.
Thank you very much. I'm zooming in from Hastings on the English seaside. So I'd like to say good morning to everyone and good afternoon to the people in Australia. And salam alaikum to Mahmoud and our friends in Doha. So to introduce myself, I think, my name is Simon Hester. For 18 years, I was an inspector with the UK Health and Safety Executive, effectively a labour inspector. And during that time, I was a UK government inspector for the construction of various stadiums, Wembley and so on, and the London Olympics. I also ran a project for some years for the Health and Safety Executive on migrant workers' rights in the UK and health and safety of migrant workers in construction. And then on top of all that, I was the trade union representative for the UK's labour inspectors in my union called Prospect. So I've been heavily involved in trade union activity and organisation. And I think many of my colleagues would call me a trade union militant. So when I received the call from Jim Kennedy from Unite the Union, I think it was in November 2016, to assist the BWI work in Qatar, I was, I'll be perfectly honest, very skeptical. I'm also a football fan. I was aware of the 22 World Cup in Qatar, and I'd read the media reports by Amnesty and by Human Rights Watch. I did not want to be involved in any kind of whitewash or PR exercise, and I made that very clear. Jim and then subsequently Jin Sook were extremely persuasive, so I eventually agreed to be involved. And so since then, I've been involved. I wasn't involved in all the initial discussions to establish the inspection process, but I've been directly involved in virtually all the inspections, not every single one, essentially as a technical advisor, health and safety expert, inspector type expert or experience. And I took on the role as the lead inspector, worked very closely with Jin Sook, the volunteers in Doha, and all the various other inspectors who've come along as being part of the BWI team. And at this point, I think I just want to make my personal tribute to Jin Sook. On top of what everyone else has said, I think there's 3 little points I'd like to make. One, her incredible attention to detail and the incredible hard work she put in to make sure everything lined up. Everybody knew what they were doing. It was a very tight run operation, and she was the person in charge. She had a very sharp, inquiring mind, always asking the questions, technical questions. What does this mean? What does that mean? Why are you pushing this? Why are you saying that? Always wanting to know the detail and understand it completely. And what's something people have mentioned her charm, but you have to say she had a great sense of humor, a fantastic laugh, and was able to use that in a to get her way. It was a fantastic. She's a great person to work with. So the principles we operated under, I think, were three main principles. And I'm sorry, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. That's not my bag. So the three principles were: one, no holding back. We were not going to be from the BWI side. We were not going to be diplomatic or allow ourselves to be sweet talked. Our job, in a very short space of time, was to find problems, to look for problems, to find problems, highlight them, and demand remedial action. We were under an obligation not to publicize our findings independently of the SC, but this was not going to prevent us from being quite robust and hard when necessary, both with the contractors and, if necessary, with the SC. Although that wasn't really a big issue, the SC side of it. They were more than welcome. They welcomed criticism and welcomed robust challenge. The second thing to understand really is that a workplace inspection is a limited form of management control. It can only provide a snapshot of what's happening, especially on a large, complex construction site. So, of course, we had to find particular hazards and problems, but we had to use this not to build up a list of failures and non-compliances and faults and so on, a hazard spotting tick box type exercise. It was essential during the inspection process to get behind each issue, to explore and discover the management failing that brought about the problem. And by rectifying the high level management failing, the theory was that we could influence the way the projects were managed when we weren't there, in order to try and create a health and safety management culture that could eliminate particular problems at source. We were trying to deal with the root cause of the management failings, or procedural failings, or policy failings, not just deal with the symptoms as we saw them. And closely allied to this approach, and obviously a key feature of the whole thing from the BWI's perspective, was the building of workers' self-organization, self-confidence through the worker welfare forums. So our inspections, we've been maybe once every other month. We'd go for 4 or 5 days. So every 2 months, 4 or 5 days. So an underlying and critical principle for us was the creation of a culture of ongoing worker representation and engagement to promote change and high standards for the long term. And I think those are the three principles we work to try and hold the SC and the Qatari regime to account for all the promises they were making. And I think it's worked in general. We can come on to some of the more detail in a bit.
Thank you very much, Simon. And now, finally, I would ask Gerd Albrecht to share with us his view on the role of B6 in the whole process. Please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good evening, and whatever time frame you're all in here from Brussels. It's a little bit cold for them this time of year, so I think it's a little bit warmer in some other places. Perhaps introduce myself first. My name is Gerd Albrecht. I've been at B6 since 2007. I'm leading the people organization, everything what is to do about people, but as well a part on health and safety. You know that B6 has been in a company that's already there for 110 years, and more than 60 years of them, they were already in the Middle East. We have as such a large international experience. We were the main contractor with our partners for the Khalifa Stadium and Al Wakra, I think it's now called Al Yanoub Stadium for the moment. And I have to say that we are, I think, since 2012, 2030 already in discussion with our colleagues of the BWI and with our local unions in Belgium and in Europe with regards to safety and health and we have been of course, by being as long present in the Middle East as well from a certain point of view of Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, sometimes mentioned in their reports. So for us, the fact that it was not an unlikely partnership, it was a likely partnership because we are partners in the same. We want the health and the safety of all our workers intact. And I think that from a government point of view or from a union trade point of view or from us as a contractor, we have kind of the same needs and we have the same outcomes that we wanted to give. I think at the end of the day, with the fact that there was an evolution towards the workers' welfare, from a European point of view, seeing we are a Belgian construction company, we already had, of course, a large experience with worker welfare and discussions with unions on a local front, but expecting or introducing the same thing in the Middle Eastern area was not that simple, and we'll come back on some details afterwards. I think what has the safety and the health audits as well towards the accommodation as towards the project have learned us that this is really a journey. It's not a journey where from one day to another everything changes and then everything is very fixed. It's a journey as well of an open discussion, having an open framework and having an open mindset, because some of these actions, of course, you have projects or if you have accommodations running over a large period of time. So if law changes or if practices change, you need to be able to adapt correctly. And at the end of the day, I think as long as, and I think that's a really positive point, as long as you can do that together with your workforce and together with your stakeholders, I think it brings a cultural change. I think that's the most important part at the end, is that I think the mindset as well from a managerial point of view, as from a client point of view, as from a controlling point of view, has changed over the last couple of years. And I think that's perhaps the biggest impact that we have seen, is that everybody is now a lot more focused on bringing that approach really to life, not just on paper, but really in reality, as well on the project sites as on the accommodation sites.
Great. Thank you very much for this round of introductions. Now I have first question to the panel, which I'd like you to all answer very briefly. And it first of all concerns the visions and ambitions of the partnership that we are discussing today, and how these visions and ambitions of the partnership were strategically laid out and operationalized on the ground. How did you, as important stakeholders for the success of this partnership, contribute? I suggest we go in the same order. So please, Mahmoud.
Thank you, Thomas. So I think it's important to mention, I mean, I think, again, once the agreement was signed in 2016, and again, a lot of work went into the signing, and Ambit touched on it, and the podcast that Rachel was kind enough to reference in the earlier discussion really gets into the events that took place prior to the signing between BWI and the SC, specifically Hassan and Ambit. The late Jun Suk Lee and myself obviously inherited the MOU collaboration, and our job was really to turn it into a reality. And these were tremendous ambitions and a tremendous vision by both our leadership. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a structured plan. We had to make sure that the action plan was culminated in establishment of a joint working group. And this was really instrumental, is having the right people around the table from both parties to be able to turn this into a reality on the ground. And these permanent members became instrumental in terms of making sure that there's consistency from each inspection, making sure that the findings were clearly communicated to not only the contractors themselves at any given point inspection, but also to the leadership, of both organizations, and of course culminated in the annual report that was published by both organizations. The project plan that we developed, again, sets out the inspections over a particular year. They were deliberately designed in such a way to allow for the contractors to be able to absorb the issues that were identified and spend enough time. We wanted to be fair to them and to the operation. We didn't want any sort of band-aid solutions. We wanted permanent solutions, sustainable solutions, and giving them time to do that in a very sort of in a very practical sense made a world of difference. And we also assigned certain responsibilities to other representatives within the SC and BWI, of course, as part of that joint working group. Again, we targeted about 6 site inspections per year, as well as accommodations, focusing primarily on the main contractors. And generally, the main contractors are made up of 2 different parties. For example, in the case of Sixco or B6 in Khalifa, for instance, or even in Al Janoub Stadium, it was them and a local partner. So the audit or the inspection would include both parties as part of that, and we would go to the accommodations of both contractors. In some cases, contractors would have multiple accommodation blocks. We would also visit them as well, depending on the time. But generally speaking, we would go to the accommodation that housed the most workers. And many of those findings were applied program-wide anyway. So where good practice is identified on one site, we would encourage other contractors to adopt. Where there were issues identified on one site that required certain solution, we would actually take those solutions and apply them as well across the board. And I'll get into some specifics, although I'm sure Simon will beat me to it. As you'll see from here, he's highly technical. He's very good at remembering the details of these past 3 years. So I will leave it to Simon to get into those details. So my challenge, again, as the chair, and Jin being the co-chair, we really helped map out the actual process itself. And she was very instrumental in focusing on the BWI side. Simon became a fixture of the inspections throughout the 3 years, which was important. And then what we did is we identified certain inspectors from the country of origin of the main contractor partner that we were inspecting. So in the case of B6, for instance, BWI was good at identifying inspectors as well as those trade unions from Belgium to be part of that inspection team. I need to also mention one thing that's very important. Again, going back to making sure that there was no interference in the inspections and there was transparency and commitment from the onset, is that the BWI side covered their own expenses. This wasn't a collaboration that we as the SC paid for. They flew their own resources at their own dime to come in for the past 3 years. Everything was covered by the BWI organization and its affiliates. And so this is quite important to say this. And so, of course, now leveraging on those trade unions and those inspectors, this was integral to benefit from those inspectors with specific knowledge and leverage over those companies due to their close vicinity back home. Kickoff meetings were always held to set the expectation for every single inspection. There were also closing meetings that were done with the main contractors themselves. This was important for them to accept the findings, to challenge the findings if there was any challenges, to have an open, frank discussion with them. And then a final closing meeting was held with myself and Jin Sukli, where the inspectors on both sides were collective findings were presented to us for final approval. They were then obviously instituted, they were approved, as I mentioned, and they were obviously inputted into a system. We designed a very specific and unique system to accept all of the inspection findings. So nothing gets included with our own inspections. Just to be clear, and I didn't say this earlier, we as an organization have a comprehensive, robust auditing and inspection regime. We inspect 100% of the contractors and their subcontractors over an evolving audit schedule, over a quarterly schedule. And so we wanted to make sure that the inspections that come out of the joint working group are independent to anything that we do as an organization, both the workers' welfare team, my team, as well as the health and safety team on the construction site. This was important for us. And then, of course, ensuring that the rectification, we do a lot of follow-up with the rectification with the contractors. Again, in most cases, the rectifications were swift. They were accepted. You'll have some challenges, no doubt. It was definitely challenging. This was part of the healthy element of the collaboration, is that we could speak openly about things that we may have disagreed with from both partners. And again, to echo Simon's points earlier, and of course, in addition to the testimony, I cannot emphasize enough that from my perspective as the SC counterpart chairing this, I have to, immense gratitude goes to Jin Suk for being a tremendous partner in this, for me personally. For her to be able to, to weather sort of to shoulder the burden of making sure that this is done seamless, that there is trust between both parties. I mean, it takes a certain individual, a certain character to be able to carry that through. And she did a tremendous job. I mean, she's terribly missed. And I don't think we'll be able to actually fill that void, to be very frank with you. So that's it in a nutshell, in terms of the vision and ambition at a very high level, on how we actually went about doing it. And of course, this was the same model. I do want to point out that as a result of the success and the trust that was developed between our organizations, we then shifted away from only dealing with the main contractors that were within the remit of BWI and its affiliates. We actually expanded the scope in year 3 to also include sites. For example, we have in Lusail, HBK and a Chinese company as the main contractor. This wasn't part of the initial portfolio of companies or sites that we were inspecting. We've actually brought them in the fold. And I think now we've touched on every single construction site on our program under the joint working group inspections.
Well, leaving aside the general high-level principles that we've been talking about, my role, which in terms of health and safety in general, labor laws and so on and so forth, my role was very operational. So we had to conduct these inspections with the SC as joint inspections, but it wasn't quite as simple as that, because we were going to be there for a very short time. We had to work very quickly, and we had to get everybody up to speed and then operational in hours. We didn't have time to massive time to prepare and get everybody ready and so on. So from the BWI side, it was Jin Suk who managed who was going to be in the team and got the volunteers from the various affiliates, who were all brilliant, by the way, I have to say. But we had to get our team operating to common principles and themes and a common standard as best we could. All the BWI inspectors, mainly trade union representatives from many different countries, coming from different backgrounds and traditions and skills, we had to work together quite quickly because we had to deal with the SC as well. So we needed a very tight operation in order to be able to put up a common position and a common front, if you like, with our partners in the SC. They're partners, but we weren't in each other's pockets. Let's put it that way. We had to be careful how we dealt with the SC. So we developed a template inspection plan based on, for example, the inspection regime at the London Olympics, previous experience, international standards, the SC's own standards, and inspectors from the various countries brought their own particular skills with them. And to give you a very brief overview of the timetable, we'd fly into Doha on a Sunday. If we all arrived in time, we'd have a meeting of the team, our team, the BWI team, on the Sunday evening. Then on the Monday, we'd have a meeting with the SC team jointly. And often on a Monday afternoon, we'd be out onto a site, or maybe the Tuesday, and then the Wednesday, and then we'd fly out on Wednesday, or maybe Thursday. So it was a very short time, and we tried to do two stadiums and 2 accommodation facilities in each visit, at least minimum of that. And we were working quite hard and quite long hours and so on. So we had to develop a working relationship with the SC team. And I think this developed over time. I think it's fair to say that at the beginning, we were quite suspicious of each other. I was certainly suspicious of them, and I got the impression that they didn't quite know who we were and what we were going to do. But they were joint inspections. I'll give one example. The first, from my memory, the first inspection we did, one of the issues that cropped up, and it was quite difficult for us. We had to be quite hard about it. I think it was at Al Wakra. We were on an inspection team. There were a lot of inspectors. So there was half a dozen from the BWI, several from the SC, and then there were lots of site managers with us. So it was a big gang of people walking around. And we realized during the inspection that effectively the contractors had a kind of man marking scheme. If we tried to wander off and talk to anybody, we would get followed by a manager. And we were finding it impossible to speak to anybody without either a manager right on our shoulders or even a whole team of people suddenly arriving to check what we were saying to the workers and what the workers were saying back. And that completely destroyed any ability to have a proper conversation with anybody freely. So one of the things we had to establish as an absolute red line from an early stage was our ability as the BWI inspectors to talk to the workers directly, freely, independently, as individuals or as groups, and also formally through the worker welfare forums and so on. So that was quite an important part of the process of establishing the principle that we were going to inspect properly and not be sidetracked or monitored by anybody, the contractors or the SC. I think that's answered the question. The principle and the ambition was to be able to do a proper inspection, not a whitewash job, a proper inspection, and secondly, to be able to speak to the workers independently. Those are the two key principles we tried to put in practice.
It's not always easy coming after these two great speakers, so I will try to do my best. I think from a contractor point of view, at that moment in time, you have always two obligations. A, to be compliant. You need to make sure that whatever your client or whatever the government rules or whatever the inspection reports come and discover, you need to be compliant. And B, you need to continue to do your business. And that's kind of a mixture, I think, where every company at a certain point, especially if I may say it like that, in construction, which is a low margin business, where you need to balance this out and where you need to make sure that whatever you do is you look at all the critical elements that are coming out of audit reports. You look at your investment portfolio over the lifespan over your project, and at the end of the day, you need to challenge from time to time if the suggestions that come out of audit make the necessary impact for the welfare and the well-being of the people. I think if I take it a bit from an evolution point of view, since we have been working with the BWI, like I said, and already with our own labor unions over a large period of time, I think when the MOU was signed between the SC and BWI, we kind of in that same framework signed our international framework agreement for workers' welfare in 2017 as a group, as basically a group. We signed that for our worldwide operations. Again, a little bit to make sure that from a managerial point of view, we got all our managers up to speed and on board as well in every region of the country, but especially, of course, in the countries where we had that projects running and where we were working on these two stadia. I think, and I hear from time to time the comments of Simon. I think for everybody it's a change process, and I think the focus, which was in the beginning, that we had several accommodation camps, was perhaps dominantly to more, I would say, welfare kind of items, clearly shifted between welfare in the broader sense to, I would say, human resources practices, and then at the end to site visits and safety on site as well. I think during the process we have seen it was a kind of a movement of emancipation for everybody, not only for the site superintendents who were used to be in a certain framework and a certain mindset of working with the labor, but as well from a point of view is how do you look at certain items and what are you or what do you think is most important. And I think that is something that we have seen over the period that we have been working now and surely the last 10 years, a massive shift upwards, a massive shift of good practices, a massive shift of new laws and new regulations, but as well a shift on the openness and the transparency that has came into the system. I think that's very important. I think with all the reports and what Mahmoud already shared, I think the joint reports that were published by Desi and BWI, has learned not only for us who were, I think, in operations at that moment in time, but for a broader community, that a lot of work has been done. I think that is something that we need to recognize from all the partners. As such, I think that's something there where you see progress in a fast pace, where sometimes countries took many years. I think here has been done in a very short time frame.
In the second round, I would like to go maybe a bit more specifically into the joint inspections and to see a bit what are your main assessment points with the joint inspections. Was there a clarity of the roles? What was the process? What were the dynamics during the inspections? I think we touched a little bit on this already by Simon, for example, but we can go a bit into more detail, and especially also in the subcontracting chain. And what were the positive takeaways of the impact? Maybe in thinking about the time, I'd like to link this in your interventions with this following question also to look a bit on the corrective remedy enforcement. I mean, how were these, what impact and improvements were visible from this mechanism? And how did the contractors react? I think if we could touch a bit on this already in this round of interventions, that would be great. I think we could go again in the same order, please, Mahmoud.
Thomas, would you like me to cover all these questions or just one at a time?
Try to, we're running out of time, so pick the most important ones for a brief intervention.
Fair enough.
And I think if you can touch a bit on the corrective remedy, that would be good.
Sure. No worries. So I think in terms of the assessments, I'll touch very briefly on this because I think we've already covered it. I mean, the three major assessments really fundamentally are the health and safety inspections, which is by far the most critical assessment for the JWG and for the establishment of the JWG. And the fundamental reason for it was really about, focusing on site health and safety inspection. That's the first and foremost. And again, there have been, as I mentioned previously, we have a significant health and safety inspection protocols on the sites, as well as on the accommodation. And this is something we felt was highly necessary to have an independent team to come in and actually provide that additional layer of expertise and oversight on our program. And again, it's all for the benefit of improving and all for the benefit of ensuring that the highest levels of health and safety standards are adopted on our sites. And of course, the second key area was the accommodation inspections, as I mentioned earlier. We've spent a lot of time in Sixco's accommodation. I still have very vivid memories of the Sixco inspections in Shahaniya, which Simon knows fully well, that experience with Sixco and where they were and where they ended up throughout the duration of the inspections. And of course, we as our standards have a provision of several key facilities and key requirements in the standards, very unique in Qatar, which includes everything from recreational facilities, medical facilities, computer rooms, sports fields, recreational fields. Our standards are quite descriptive in these requirements. And of course, working with contractors to ensure that they adopt all of this through undoubtedly the journey, as Garrett mentioned, is absolutely essential to make sure we are giving a home away from home for our workers. The third and final critical assessment area was, of course, the fundamental grievance system, the workers' welfare forms, and this is where BWI's bread and butter comes in terms of dealing as a union, dealing with workers' representatives, making sure there's fair elections. They were instrumental. Jin and I worked very closely. She was, it was great for her and her team to review the election material that we had produced. This was in fact in 2017-18, which then paved the way for the election material being actually expanded throughout all of the different forms. We've had 54 elections since the review of that election material, with over 80% voter turnout. Again, the confidence of the workers in turning out to these elections is absolutely pivotal. In terms of the dynamics, the question around dynamics, look, with any partnership, and I think Simon alluded to this right from the get-go, and especially in an unlikely partnership, as this panel has been dubbed, there are going to be some growing pains, undoubtedly. And again, there's dynamics, personalities, different cultures, different backgrounds. You know, but again, I think in many ways, despite all of that, I think this was the unique element of this, is bringing individuals, different backgrounds, different technical skills, different experiences, really, in dealing with organizations such as ours, some more extensive than others. There was a bit of doubt. How genuine is the SC? How committed are they to this process? You know, I have to say, at the end of the day, you know, this collaboration would never have taken off if there was never a shared commitment from the onset between Hassan and Ambit. Hassan would never agree to this. Our organization and our leadership would never agree to this if there was not a genuine effort to try to improve, to try to leverage on the experts to enhance our, you know, our operation and the well-being of our workers. This is absolutely fundamental to say. The challenge, yes, is taking that vision, and actually our job, my job, Jin's job, is to reflect it and actually convince others on the sites. And again, you're dealing with many different players at any given point on construction site, different contractors from the main all the way to the tiers, where you do have skepticism. There was pushback, absolutely, in the early days. But I think we overcame those, undoubtedly. We have overcome those. A lot of hard work went into that. And I think there was the trust between the two parties was reached throughout the duration of these 3 years, undoubtedly. And so I think, look, I think the dynamics, absolutely, yes, it was there. There were definitely some healthy tension early on. And of course, to a certain extent, also there was the challenge of a lack of a international construction benchmark. You know, from our perspective, we really genuinely wanted to actually create a safety culture in our sites. This is something that's a bit of a miss throughout the region. And this is where I think we spent a lot of time in this, is how do we really change the culture? Not necessarily the technical aspects of how you operate a construction site, but making sure people understood why they were doing what they were doing, making sure that supervisors had the training and the skill set to be able to actually look out for these issues on the site, understand where some of the risk areas appear. You know, I know we dealt a lot, for example, in the use of harnesses early on. Not to get technical, as I said, I'll leave the technical aspects to Simon, but I can't help but mention the aspect of harnesses and use of harnesses, you know, and the misuse, I should say, of harnesses throughout the site, which was actually quite systematic across all of the sites, and how we actually endeavored to try to overcome that with the BWI team and also with the supervisors. In some ways, actually, this actually became the impetus for the supervisory training that we developed to try to give them the skills necessary to know what to look for and how to actually be a bit more, you know, when to be firm, when to be fair on the site, and when to actually ensure that they step in and making sure that the workers themselves don't put themselves in harm's way. Unimpeded access was critical, yes, absolutely. In the early days, of course, making sure that the BWI team fundamentally, but the joint working group at large, had unimpeded access to the workers. And of course, creating the right opportunities for worker interviews. That's important. Early on, I recall the inspectors themselves felt that they needed to do worker interviews inside the actual construction site while work was happening. This is obviously a safety hazard. Of course, Simon would tell you that it is a safety hazard. So how could we overcome this? And by having different interview approaches. And we attempted several in the early days. And of course, we landed on an approach that we felt was agreed by me and Jin and the rest of the teams that was unhindered. We had several teams carrying the interviews in the construction site without even, in many cases, without even the SC team, and certainly not the contractors on site being part of those interviews, so we can allow the workers to freely speak and open up. And of course, the workers' welfare forums, which was probably the most critical of all, had the team, Jin and the team, actually observe, participate, and they were able to see the free flow of information and concerns that were coming out. I mean, I recall we did have some challenges in the early days with the Al Rayyan site specifically, but we were able to overcome it. And I think the confidence that I received, or at least we all received, is the ability for the workers to be the workers' representatives rather, to be very open about the issues that they had. There was no fear. We created an environment where there was no fear of retaliation. The systems we put in place, the forum is obviously integral, but we've also introduced hotlines. We've introduced the worker interviews. We have a pretty sort of substantial worker interview process that we as a Supreme Committee engage heavily with the workers. Probably, I would say, the biggest positive takeaway from our collaboration so far, regardless of the challenges, has always been the collaborative nature and the shared goal to overcoming any obstacle. And so the international health and safety expertise that brought by the BW team did introduce absolutely a fresh perspective on how to enhance certain aspects of the SC program to better align the international best practice. And as the program grew and became more mature, we were then able to really leverage on specific skill sets of the international inspectors that were coming into focus, whether it's electrical issues or cement pouring issues or whatever it may, or working at heights, which was absolutely integral. I think this really enabled us to take the program to a different level and really touch on various aspects of what you would expect on a major construction site. Highly complex, many issues would arise, but how are you able to maintain a consistent approach throughout? And again, it's the inspections themselves are a one-time inspection. They come in and they go. And for us, fundamentally, for me and for the health and safety team on the site, was to ensure that there's a consistent approach to how we address these concerns in a very long-term sustainable fashion, as opposed to a one-time element or one-time approach only during the inspections themselves. From a remedy standpoint, I'll close with a remedy question, Thomas. Again, once the inspections were completed, as I mentioned, the JWG would convene immediately to discuss the findings. There was a collaborative approach in terms of having an openness about what the findings were, what the non-compliances were, as well as the observations. And the findings report would then be generated into an electronic system, of course, where the contractors themselves would immediately get access to the findings, and a rectification plan is produced and work commences on rectifying those issues. The follow-up inspections that the JWG would do, for every inspection that would be carried out, a follow-up would be carried out in a subsequent inspection, and we would then introduce a new stadium. And that was the process, fundamentally. 2 months or every 2-3 months, an inspection would be carried out, and a follow-up of the previous inspection would be carried out to ensure that the non-compliances were closed and there's been progress been made. I am very pleased to say that in the 2019 inspection, in fact, and you'll see this in the report that was published, we had more observations than non-compliances. And I think we can see that there's been a systematic improvement throughout the duration of the 3 years in the program. Of course, there will always be recurring non-compliances. There were during the actual inspections themselves. I mentioned briefly working at heights and the issue of harnesses. Occupational health-related injuries is an issue. This is actually a new issue and a new area that had to be explored, and we had to focus a lot on it. And Simon and the inspectors that came really helped us tremendously with this. And subsequently, a lot of training has been developed now through our own training partner, QISC in Qatar, as well as some of the training that was developed or delivered by the BWI inspectors for the workers' welfare representatives around occupational health, safety, and occupational injuries that could take place, and making sure we shed some light on these issues and work collaboratively to resolve them.
Great. Thank you very much, Mahmoud. Now to you again, Simon, on your main assessments of the joint inspections, and maybe you could touch also very briefly on how you create your inspection teams and on their work a bit specific.
Well, I'm conscious of the time, and I'm going to break the questions down in a different way. Did they do what they were told to do by us, and did we make an impact? I think those are the two, in terms of operational side, the two key things. An inspection is a flying visit. We came, we inspected, we made our recommendations, and then we left. And we relied heavily on the Supreme Committee inspection teams to follow through on that. And we relied totally on them to follow through on that. And we checked up on that, but we had to develop that trust, say we're going to follow through. We also had the BWI representatives on the ground in Doha who did a fantastic job and do a fantastic job. And their role essentially was to try to maintain communication with the worker welfare reps on the sites directly or through the training programs. That was incredibly important feedback approach. The employers obviously reacted in exactly the same way as employers do the world over. Some of them are extremely receptive and approach the inspections as an opportunity to learn and to improve and to make things better. Others were much more defensive and argumentative. And this is quite normal. This is what you find anywhere. And sometimes it got quite difficult. So, I mean, I think one of the managers made a formal complaint about me being rude at one point. So I just took that as a badge of honor, and I've done a good job because we had to make a difference. Secondly, which is a very common thing as well, Mahmoud touched on it, is you can have all the best policies in the world, you can have very good high-level management, but if the frontline supervisors, the foreman, the charge hands, whatever phrase you use, if they're not actually up to speed on all the issues, and by and large they aren't, then the whole system breaks down. And you can have risk assessments and method statements coming out of your ears, but if the people on the front line doing the work haven't had that explained to them and it's not managed properly, then it falls apart. And that was an early issue we flagged up to the SC. You had to get the supervisors up to a higher standard. Did we make an impact? And I think we made an impact there. Did we make an impact? I'm going to make just three examples. I think we made a significant impact. One, on occupational health that Mahmoud mentioned. The SC from the beginning had a very good set of standards for safety. The same set of standards didn't really exist on the occupational health side of it. What makes you ill from work? People who haven't been to Doha and Qatar may be surprised to learn, I was surprised when I went there, that on every construction site and in every accommodation facility, there is a clinic with a doctor and nurses, all professional, all fully trained on site. This is not usually the case, certainly in the UK. But the medical staff, the doctors and nurses, very good at what they do, but they didn't have much knowledge or training on the occupational ill health issues that arise from a construction site. So we flagged that up, and the SC took that up completely, and they ran with that. They ran with that ball and instituted a whole training program, retraining program for the medical staff. We pushed for this, but I mean, they did it anyway, was to change all procedures so that the medical problems thrown up and found out through the clinics and the medical staff could be fed back to the construction sites and the safety managers so that they could actually try to change the way the work was being done to enable the... Are you able to hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So a general leveling up of all the issues around ill health, hand-arm vibration syndrome, dermatitis, skin problems, effects of fume, dust, chemicals, and so on. All that, I think the BWI intervention was very important, if not even critical, to raising the level of the approach to that. On one of the sites, just to give an example of how things worked, on one of the sites, we encountered some very serious safety problems. It was unexpected because a decision had been made to open the stadium early, to speed up the construction timetable, and to massively and rapidly increase the size of the workforce. And during our inspection, it was very clear that major problems had arisen. It was clear to us and the BWI, it's very clear to the SC inspectors, and in particular, the transport arrangements to keep people and vehicles apart from each other had completely broken down. And I remember writing a memo, calling and then writing a memo to Jin Sook saying, you know, this is serious. There's an imminent risk of a major incident. It was quite quick work had to be done. The SC followed through to reshape the entire management structure for safety on that site to try and keep to the timetable and keep to the program, but also completely ramp up the safety side of it. So I think, you know, in that instance, the collaboration worked quite well to deal with an unexpected situation that had arisen. And finally, just to give an example of the collaborative approach, during one of the inspection visits, a worker on one of the sites fell from a great height in a gantry, fell to his death. One of the few fatalities on the sites. It was during our inspection visit. The BWI, Jin Sook, I assume, requested that the BWI have direct involvement in the investigation, which was being carried out by the SC. So I was asked to stay on for a few days to be part of that investigation team. And I think it's worth emphasizing at this point that I thought the investigation itself was incredibly thorough, professional, and independent of the employers. And I thought that the inspection team did a good job of investigating and getting down to the root causes of the incident. So it was quite a high level collaboration here. You know, we were involved in quite difficult situations, and I think it worked quite well. Just one final point, which I still think we have to, we're dealing with major construction companies, and we had to be quite robust with them at times. And I don't think we completely won all the arguments. For example, let me give you one tiny example, which anyone who's been at work knows this kind of problem. in the accommodation facilities, they had to have um, leisure facilities, TVs, Wi-Fi, all that kind of thing. And we have many, many workers from the Indian subcontinent, and their passion is cricket. They don't play football, they play cricket. And the cricket pitches in these accommodation facilities were very, I mean, I thought they were quite dangerous. It was stony, horrible. You wouldn't want to jump and try and catch a ball or whatever, or fall over. These are major construction companies who can landscape beautiful gardens and stadiums and football pitches. And they couldn't seem to put a basic cricket pitch down in the accommodation facilities. So that was a little niggling argument all the way through all the inspections. So we had to fight on the big issues, but just the silly little things that really not that too difficult to fix.
Great. Thank you very much, Simon, for these very interesting details. I'd give the word to Gerd Albrecht for a last few words on your assessment. But really briefly, we are
I will make it
completely running out of time.
as short as possible. I think many points again already has been said. I think on the one hand, these inspections gave you general principles, but on the other hand, it gave you a lot of details as well to manage. And if you look at the construction site, it's fairly easy to say that you work there with more than one person. You have a couple of hundreds working there. You have skill levels that are different. You have many subcontractors on the same site. You have a large scale logistics to organize. So a lot of people intervene, and a lot of people have an interaction with the safety of everybody on such a site. I think at the end of the day, if I may say it like that, from a contractor point of view, I think for us it was always a genuine effort to make sure that the sites were as safe as possible. And even though I think any audit is always welcomed, we as well used it as kind of a forum to make sure that our people were well trained and well understood what in fact the final purpose was. The final purpose was to make sure that we have a safe environment for our people, and secondly, we deliver the quality and the project on time within the budget and within the quality that was foreseen. Many times, I think as well, it engages a lot of more development training of our people themselves, because it's not only by saying, okay, this is wrong. It's not only by saying this is not compliant or whatever. You need to make sure that you don't only manage that one problem that you have seen there. You need to reproduce it over many other instances during the project. So it's a lot of I would say, taking the little detail and pulling it back to a larger perspective and say, what are you going to do with it so that tomorrow, if there is a new inspection, these types of problems don't exist anymore. And it's always, if you take the example of a cricket pitch, sometimes it's the small and easy things that you get in oversight very rapidly, because everybody is thinking about the big picture, making sure that you deliver on time, deliver within the scheme that was presented, and then these small things sometimes fall into the cracks. And so that's very clear that audit sometimes, and especially the BWI and as well Jin, that was instrumental on that one as well, sometimes pinpoints, look at this is easy, this is for the welfare of everybody, and you can do it by tomorrow morning. So it's always that balance from a contractor point of view that is very nice to see. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much. We are 5 minutes over, so unfortunately we can't go into other questions. For example, also very interesting would have been to see what impact this whole project has or will have on workers elsewhere in Qatar, and also on in the future in Qatar. Maybe in the next session we could touch on this. In any case, I'd like to thank all three speakers here today for their very interesting interventions. And I think what we have learned is that this unlikely partnership turned out to be a quite fruitful partnership in the end for all sides involved. And I think this is a great news and great impact that this partnership actually has had on the workers and for the workers. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
and goodbye.